Check 1 2. Good evening, my friends. Welcome to the stream. Live on Periscope, on Twitter via Periscope right now. If you want to watch over there, if you want to check the replay over there. Also, obviously, live on YouTube. We are ready to go. It's a very interesting topic tonight. So, thank you all for joining. I'd like to make one announcement as we start out. Coming up next week, early next week, at some point next week, Michael Jones from Inspiring Philosophy will be right here on this channel. We're working on setting that up. He's doing a debate in Toronto this week. I believe that is tonight, if I'm not mistaken. So I hope to see that debate too. So, he says that will be recorded, so maybe it'll be available on YouTube. We don't know about that yet, but Michael Jones from Inspiring Philosophy will be here next week. We'll talk about the digital physics argument. Talk a little bit about theistic evolution, idealism, lots of interesting topics. Check out his channel if you want to know a little more about those topics. He's one of the leading debaters that we have, one of our YouTube debaters that's out there right now. So you'll want to be familiar with Michael Jones from Inspiring Philosophy. Okay, tonight we're talking about godless, childless, hopeless. What does all that mean, right? Well, each one of these leads to the next. If you are godless as a nation, the flag is there to indicate our nation. As a nation, if you are godless, you are most likely going to become childless. And if you are godless and childless, that leads to hopeless. We're going to show you why that is. This is not just anecdotal. We're going to give you some statistics that show this to be the case. Okay. Now, there are links in the description for you tonight. There are detailed links in the description that will lead you to all of the information that I'm going to be giving you in this presentation. So let's get right into it. Starting with an article that came from NPR from May of last year, 2019. The title of this article is United States Births Fell to a 32-year Low in 2018. This is a Centers for Disease Control report from a poll, from a research poll that they had done. And this says that the birth rate in the United States is in a record slump. The article reads, the United States birth rate fell again in 2018 from 3.7 million births, almost 3.8 million births, to the lowest number of births in 32 years. The numbers also sank the U.S. fertility rate to a record low. Not since 1986 has the United States seen so few babies born. 2018 was the fourth consecutive year of birth declines. Now, this is according to the provisional birth rate report from the CDC, or the Centers for Disease Control, who tend to run these kind of reports, kind of studies. Now, birth rates fell. As another point that's interesting, birth rates fell for nearly all racial and age groups. So across the board, birth rates are falling. The only place that gains were seen were in women in their late 30s and early 40s. Interesting, right? Right off the bat, we see an indication that women are opting for careers rather than families. All right? This is the United States. You should be able to do whatever you want to here. But we have to be smart about it, right? Don't we want to continue to have a United States of America? Don't we want to continue to have the liberties and freedoms that we have? We don't want to lose that. We don't want to hand it over. And one way we can lose that, if we stop having babies, if we stop having families. There's a very important piece of information in this report that you're going to hear that has to do with immigration. You're going to find out, folks, that if we don't start supporting, building and having families, having children, we might just lose everything that that the founding fathers set up. All these things, forget about the founding fathers. All of the things that you enjoy today, the ability to worship as you please, the freedoms and liberties that we have here that are dwindling bit by bit. We're letting them go bit by bit, but that's what this is. This is a call to everyone, especially YouTubers, Christians on YouTube, because there is a point to be made here. One of the points of this report is to show how important it is that we have a presence on YouTube, on the internet, for sure, but specifically on YouTube. So let's keep going. One of the surprises to demographers, people who study the population, who say that with the United States economy and job market continuing a years-long growth streak, we're in a prosperous time right now. These demographers had expected the birth rate to show signs of stabilizing or rising. This has been happening for a while. It's been going down for a while. So researchers expected that to change with this good economy we have right now. You can give credit for that to whoever you like. I don't care. You want to give that credit to Donald Trump? You want to give it to Barack Obama? It doesn't matter. We're in a prosperous period right now. Let's keep our eye on the ball. But what happened instead was that we saw a drop in birth rate. We're not making new Americans like we used to. Now, this drop, they say, could force changes to forecasts that they make about how the country will actually look in years to come. It says here that with an older population and fewer young workers to sustain key social systems, that our general structure is at risk. What does that mean? Our general freedoms and liberties, the way the United States has stood as a beacon for liberty and freedom. Forget about the politics you hear in the mainstream news right now. We're talking about the real world here, not the identity politics that you hear on the mainstream media. This is the real world we're talking about. Dowell Myers, a demographer at the University of Southern California, gave these quotes about the issue. He said, "It's a national problem." He said, "The birth rate is a barometer of despair, indicating that for some reason Americans are in despair today." I wonder why that is. Have you watched this channel very much? Have you seen the push of fear-mongering? Children showing up at the United Nations, pointing their finger and blaming the previous generations for something that they can't actually prove is happening. We're upside down. We've got no reason to be sad and in despair, but for some reason, that's the case. Myers also said, "Young people won't make plans to have babies unless they're optimistic about the future." That makes sense, doesn't it? Why are young people not optimistic about the future? Are they scared to death of climate change? Are they worried that there's a climate emergency that's going to end the world in 12 years? Has Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez frightened everyone? Now, she hasn't been there quite long enough to cause an impact on these statistics, but this is not new. I've showed you from the documents, United Nations documents, that the plan for the agenda for the 21st century has been in action now since at least 1992. Myers, the demographer from USC, also said this. He said, "At first we thought it was the recession, but after a slight rise in 2012, that rate took a nosedive." He says this, "By nearly all economic standards, birth rates should now be rising." It's psychological despair. There's no reason for it. But there it is. Young people say that they're too worried to have children. They're scared to have children. Why is that? What message are our young people getting? What is it that's behind this negative sentiment among people of childbearing age? Myers cites the current political turmoil and a general gloomy outlook for America's future as one of the reasons. Now, I'm not saying he's wrong about that, clearly. There's a lot of doom and gloom out there, but is it warranted? Is there really any reason for it? Or are we all so connected to our phones and the mainstream media news cycle that we're just scared to death? That we're being sort of mind controlled into a fear that's actually now affecting the birth rate of our nation. Dow also says, not a whole lot of things are going good. He says, and that's haunting young people in particular more than old people. Why is that? Why is it haunting young people? Why are the baby boomers not worried? Why are the folks in my generation, Generation X, why are we not particularly worried? It's this wired generation. The millennials have been bombarded like no generation ever before with fear, tactics of fear and propaganda, and it's affecting the society. Many current or young folks planning to be parents also responded to the report on social media, listing a string of obstacles to having kids. So we got a look into the minds of young folks to find out, why is it? Why are they afraid? What is the fear? And they say that some of the reasons are frustration of finding childcare, or even possibly high insurance costs of having a kid, and lack of parental leave and other support systems. So all of the reasons here, or the top reasons here listed, have to do with jobs. They're saying that the reason we don't have kids is because it's too unstable right now with jobs. Listen, the economy is actually booming. Lots of jobs are available today. If you think otherwise, you might have bought into a certain line of propaganda. And I'm not playing one side or the other of the political spectrum here. I don't do that. I don't do that here. It's not a right-left paradigm thing here. It's a facts-based truth message that you're going to get here. Okay, so let's go look at some slides. We've got Elena Parent. This is funny. Elena Parent. Yes, her name is Parent, as we're talking about the birth rate. Elena Parent, a state senator in Georgia, on her Twitter made this comment. Parents know why the birth rate is falling. Kids are expensive and time-consuming, and our society does not make it easy. Now, agree with her politically or not, those are true statements. It is expensive. It is time-consuming. And our society doesn't, I'm not so sure that I agree with the last one, that our society doesn't make it easy. I think there's a perception that it's not easy. Of course, having a child is not easy. It's hard work to be a parent. You have to stop being a kid. You have to stop being a child yourself to have children and to have a family. But we're in a state of perpetual adolescence now. That's what we're trained into through social media, through the media, through Hollywood. Sociologist Sarah Damaski of Penn State. Let's get the camera back up there for you. There we go. Sociologist Sarah Damaski of Penn State says the problem is job security. Now, isn't that interesting that we've heard over and over now? The problem has to do with employment, with job security, with industry, jobs in general, in a time when according to the statistics anyway, we're in a prosperous period right now. There's plenty of jobs out there. It's a time of very low unemployment. Now, the doom and gloom doesn't seem to be supported by evidence and reality. But still, yeah, if this message gets out there and it does affect the minds of young and impressionable people who might have been affected by the severe drop, possibly, just possibly, our young folks could have been affected by a severe drop in critical thinking skills. Why might that have happened? It is my assertion that that's been brought on by the United Nations Common Core curriculum. You follow Common Core to its root, it's United Nations. And it's been in effect for well over a decade now, and we might be seeing the results of that. We're seeing young folks who can't discern truth from fiction, who don't know the difference in what's happening on television or on the internet and what's actually happening outside your window in the real world. Part of the trend also reflects a cultural shift as more Americans delay marriage and child rearing. While women in their 20s have historically given birth to the most babies in the United States, women in their early 30s had a higher birth rate in 2017 for the first time ever. And that gap widened in 2018. What is this? Well, this, once again, we're clearly seeing it's fear. These young folks claim to be afraid to have kids. They're not sure if the world's going to end tomorrow. And there's also another idea, the idea of career first and family second. Friends, societies don't maintain themselves with those priorities. The article goes on to state, what is widely seen as a bright spot in the CDC's provisional data is this. Teenagers saw a sharp drop in birth rates, falling 7% in 2018 to a level of 17.4 births per 1,000 teenagers. Teenagers being defined as between the ages of 15 and 19 here. Now, that rate has now declined by 58% since 2007 and 72% since 1991. Let me say that again. The teenage birth rate, young folks between the ages of 15 and 19, has declined nearly 60% since 2007, and since 1991 by 72%. Teenagers aren't having children anymore that much. Doesn't that sound like a great thing? That sounds like a really good thing has happened. Morals, right? It's about morals. Somehow or another, our kids, our teenagers, which mostly are in public schools, have suddenly gotten morals. Is that what's happened? Probably not. It sounds good on the surface, but if we look deeper, we find a generation of millennials today who are infatuated with their social media presence, who live inside their devices. What we find is a whole generation or a couple generations of young folks who are being atomized. It's the atomization of human beings. In other words, the separation. What atomization means, think of an atom, one little unit. You're off by yourself. They don't hang out in groups anymore. You can't get pregnant if you're not hanging out in groups anymore, right? And I'm not encouraging teen pregnancy. I'm just trying to point to the facts. I'm trying to point, look at what's happening. So it's the atomization, this fear, and this life inside the device is probably one of the main reasons for this fall in teenage pregnancy. Although it's a great stat, and we like to see that statistic fall, we have to look deeper at why has that statistic fallen. Is it because teenagers are not sexually motivated anymore? Has something changed in the mind? No. They still want it as much as ever. But something has changed in the way we interact with one another. Atomization. We're separated from one another now. And I want to mention here, if you want more information on this very issue, go to Days of Noah channel here on YouTube, DAYZOF, Noah, for expert and scholarly level coverage on this very issue, on the state of our youth, and the very likely answers as to why teens are not even looking at each other any longer. The news is not quite as good as it might seem on the surface regarding the drop in teenage pregnancy. Now, the latest birth rate data put the United States farther away from a viable replacement rate. What is a replacement rate? That is the rate that we must produce children in order for our nation to survive. Very simply stated. It is the standard for a generation in being able to replicate its numbers. The United States has generally fallen short of this level since 1971, according to the report by the CDC. Can you say population control? See, it could be that population control is happening. It's just not happening in the way anyone expected. Also, the total fertility rate fell to 1,700 births per 1,000 women over their lifetimes. Now, that's far below the replacement rate of 2,100 births per 1,000 women. That means each family needs to produce 2.1 children in its lifetime as a family in order to just replace the current rate, the current population we have. Just to stay even, we have to produce 2.1 children per family. The Census Bureau has long predicted that America's future population growth will increasingly rely on immigration. Despite a fertility rate that has historically been higher than similar developed nations. What do we see going on today? Where is the argument? It's about immigration. It would seem like someone somewhere is trying to flood us with immigrants and cause us to stop having children in order to replace our population, perhaps with a population that might be less used to freedom, that might be less willing to stand up for their freedom. If you come from an oppressed banana republic in Central America, and you get to the United States, you're just happy to be here. And those people deserve liberty and freedom, just like everyone else does. But you might not be as gung-ho. You might not be as adamant about it as some of us who see what's happening are. What if they replace the population with a group of people who are not quite so willing to stand up for these freedoms? According to the Census Agency's population clock, I've got a link in the description to this population clock. The United States is currently gaining one person every 16 seconds, in part because it's adding one international migrant every 34 seconds. Let's say that again. The U.S. is currently gaining one person every 16 seconds, not because we're having kids, not because we're having more children. No, that's not the reason. It's because we're adding one international migrant every 34 seconds. I'm not against immigration. Everyone on the planet deserves to be free. I am for law and order, because that's through law and order is how we get to have religious freedom. It's how we get to live in a country like this and do what we please. But what's happening to us? Both of those that we just mentioned are net results, meaning they account for deaths and outward migration. Now, what does the future of the U.S. really look like? Will we maintain our nation? Will we fade out of existence for lack of simply being willing to produce? Are we going to stop reproducing? Now, this is not about white babies. It's not about black babies. This is not a racial issue. This is humanity. This is the population of our country, of our nation, what makes us who we are. It's not about anyone's preferred race. This is about Americans being seduced into underbreeding ourselves into oblivion by virtue of seeking perceived pleasures and conveniences instead of families. Pleasures and conveniences, my friends, they're short-lived. Families are a legacy. All right. What about this birth rate? What kind of birth rate is needed to maintain a population? I have a link to this article in the description as well. It says here, the U.S. fertility rate needed to maintain the current population in the United States is 2.1 children per woman during her lifetime, which we just mentioned. So where does it stand now? How are we doing? Are we above that? Are we below water? Are we gaining Americans or are we losing Americans? Well, the rate stands now at 1.9, and it's falling. It's not getting better. We're going backward. So the question is, why is this fertility rate falling faster in recent years, especially among immigrant women? See, we're including immigrants in this, immigrants who've come here and become Americans. Part of us. They're Americans. As noted, experts often point to the recession, as we heard before, financial crisis, the crisis which unfolded in 2007 and 2008. The current failing fertility rate mirrors to some extent what has happened during other recessions through history. But in past recessions, the birth rate increased again once the economy recovered. Our economy has recovered. Why is the birth rate still down here? Why are we still losing? It says here there are numerous possible answers. Could start with the birth rate plunge among immigrants. Almost half of all immigrants to the United States are of Hispanic origin. But in recent years, immigration from Mexico, the biggest contributing country for many years now, has dried up. For the first time since the Great Depression, the net migration from Mexico to the U.S. has been zero. There are as many leaving as there are coming. So the migrants from south of the border are not from Mexico. Not in the most part. They're from further south. Latino immigrants who have been here longer tend to adopt U.S. attitudes and behavior, including having smaller families, which is something we have adopted here over the past couple decades. Most experts agree that the decline in the birth rate among Mexican immigrants is probably so sharp because the rate was so high that there was room for it to fall. The birth rate declining among Latino women in recent years may also be related to enhanced access to birth control, emergency contraception alternatives, and better sex education in schools. According to Kimberly Inez McGuire, a senior policy analyst at the National Latina Institute for Reproductive Health. These are her opinions. Fertility plays a role too. Nearly 1 in 5 American women now forego having children altogether. 20% of our women of childbearing age are opting out. And without babies, many consider marriage to be unnecessary. People's attitudes have followed the fertility rate. The Pew Research Center frequently surveys Americans about their thoughts on what makes a successful marriage. Between the 1990 survey and the 2000 survey, there were big increases in the percentages of people who said that sharing political and or religious beliefs was important to a good marriage. In 2007, there was a 21% increase in people who said it was important for a marriage that the couple have good housing. 37% fewer people said that having children was important. The other indicator to decline in importance from 1990 to 2007 was faithfulness. Can you remain faithful to one person? Now, why might it be that folks are less faithful to their partners today? Another reason that young folks are in fear of getting married and having children, they're worried that whoever they find is not going to stay with them. They're not going to be faithful. And they're probably justified in that fear when you watch contemporary entertainment. In Europe, Asia, and most advanced countries, people are running away from marriage, children, and family life at an amazing rate. For example, 30% of German women today say they do not intend to have children. 30% have opted out of having families. In Japan in 1960, 20% of women between 25 and 29 had never married. Today, the number is more like 60%. It is estimated that up to 25% of all East Asian women will remain single up to age 50. And up to a third will remain childless. So back to the United States now. Whatever the reasons, the United States birth rate has fallen below the level needed to keep up our population steadily. We're not growing. We're disappearing. And that's a fact. This pattern is likely to continue lower, especially as immigrants adopt these U.S. cultural norms of fewer children and smaller families, especially if Planned Parenthood keeps growing and doing what it does. This will have growing implications for the economy and the investment markets. Now, this article was from an investment website, so that's why they added that point. So at this point, you might be saying, you're probably asking, what really does godlessness have to do with the birth rate? It's a fair question. Statistics from a study reported in the Washington Post, linked in the description, gives us this indication on birth rate. Protestant and evangelical Christians produce 2.5 children per family, on average, 2.5. Now that's well above the 2.1 necessary to maintain our population. Catholics, 2.3 children per family, and Jews, 2.0, leveled out at 2 children per family. Atheists and agnostics are way behind. They're way back. Atheists average 1.6 children per family, and agnostics average 1.3 children per family. So if atheists and agnostics had their way, I suppose, and we all lived like they did, we wouldn't be here in 3 generations or 4. Americans would cease to exist. You wouldn't be able to be free and choose your career, choose your life, possibly. In order to keep your nation from falling behind and going extinct in a matter of several generations, you need to produce 2.1 children per family just to stay level. Now, once again, you might be out there and you might cry, climate change and overpopulation. You might say, we're simply being environmentally conscious. We don't want to have kids because of, carbon footprint and all that. I say to you, propaganda. You have believed the lie. You have believed the lie of the agenda for the 21st century. The new globalist idea of life and politics. Now, let's think about overpopulation for just a second. Let's put things in perspective. It's good to get a visual, right, of things so you can really get your head around. Now, we're told that we're so overpopulated, we're going to run out of food. The world's going to end because we're warming the planet and we're having too many children, right? That's what we hear in the mainstream news, media, everywhere. Well, here's a little fun fact for you. Did you know that the entire population of the planet, all 7 point whatever billion that there are, could comfortably stand shoulder to shoulder with a little room in a 500 square mile area? Now, you wouldn't want to do that, but the point, just visualize. Everyone on the planet right now could stand in one 500 square mile area. For example, a city the size of Los Angeles. Everyone could stand there together at one time, all the people on the planet. Now, this might be a very unpleasant gathering, but the point is made. Overpopulation is vastly oversold by the same political movements selling you man-made climate emergency. So it's a good idea to check the facts and relax. Now, it does not mean that we should not be good stewards of the planet. Obviously, we were given our home by God, who commanded us to be good stewards of the earth. It's also important to note the sector of our population who are more likely to have abortions. Now, let's just be honest. We all know that young Christian women end up in the abortion clinic just the same as young atheist or young non-religious women do. But that's not the point. The point is that today, in the name of convenience, in the United States alone, we maim and destroy and brutally kill, on average, 700,000 children who just so happen to be geographically located in their mother's womb. Life is life, my friends. You can argue it all you want to. Life is life. Regardless of your address, if you're alive, you're alive. And if you want to reasonably claim autonomy over your own body, now pay attention for a moment, because we hear this a lot. It's my body. I want to choose for my body. It's my body, and I'll choose. And you know what? I'll agree with you, except in one point, on one occasion. If you want to claim autonomy over your body, you're going to have to be consistent and to allow others to claim autonomy over their bodies too, right? If you want to have autonomy over your body, is it not fair to let others have autonomy over their bodies too? Well, that just so happens to include the person whose body is growing inside your body. They also have a right to autonomy over their body. You don't really have a right over that person's body. That's a political idea. That's a social construct to think that it's my body. I can choose to kill it if I want to. In great numbers, the reason for abortion is the desire to pursue a career instead of having a family, which again is just pure convenience. The amount of abortion taking place for legitimate medical reasons, where the mother and or the baby are in jeopardy of dying, is extremely low. It's insignificant. It's in the single digits. So that's not an argument. I agree. You should have a right to choose. But don't give us that argument about how concerned you are for future generations, because according to your desire to live like adolescents, seeking as much pleasure and gain as you can, our society, our nation, won't survive anyway if we continue down this path of seeking ultimate convenience and have this aversion to building families. Now, this kind of thinking, this idea that what we see happening with the birth rate, I want to have this career. I want my convenience. It's very inconvenient for me to have children. That mindset, that even works completely against the theory of evolution, which appeals to survival of the fittest, not survival of the coolest. survival of the most successfully employed, or survival of the single, non-reproducing species. So you have no argument when it comes to that. Okay, now we have the decline of Christianity. What is this? How do we tie all this together? What does religion have to do with all of this? In the United States, the decline of Christianity continues at a rapid pace. My friends, it is no coincidence that the birth rate, the amount of children we're having, that we've fallen below the rate at which we could sustain our population, coincides with the decline of Christianity, which is happening at a rapid pace. In Pew Research Center telephone surveys conducted in 2018 and 19, 65% of American adults describe themselves as Christians. That is down 12 percentage points over the past 10 years. Over 10%, folks. Folks who call themselves Christians. Meanwhile, the religiously unaffiliated share of the population, consisting of people who describe their religious identity as atheist, agnostic, or no particular faith or religion, now stands at 26%, up from 17% in 2009. You see that? Do you see the correlation there? Those who claim to be Christians fell 12%. Those who claim to be atheist, agnostic, or no religion rose 11% at the same rate. The same rate that we're losing Christians is the same rate we're gaining atheists, agnostics. Both Protestantism and Catholicism are experiencing losses of population share. Currently, 43% of U.S. adults identify with Protestantism. That is down from 51% in 2009. A 10-year period, folks. A drop that's nearing 10%. 1 in 5 adults, 20%, claim to be Catholic, down from 23% in 2009. Now, meanwhile, all subsets of the religiously unaffiliated population, a group known as the religious nuns, not like the flying nun, but the N-O-N-E-S, the religious nuns, have seen their numbers grow quite substantially. The numbers of self-described atheists has doubled from 2009. Let me say that again. The numbers of self-described atheists has doubled in the past 10 years. Agnostics now make up 5% of the U.S. Adults, up from 3% a decade ago. And 17% of Americans now describe their religion as nothing in particular. And that is up from 12% in 2009. So all across the board, we see gains in atheism and agnosticism and losses in Christians, and at the same time, a severe drop in our birth rate. Now, as a note of methodology here, each of these polls include one basic question about religious identity, and that is, what is your present religion, if any? And the possible answers are you Protestant, Roman Catholic, Mormon, Orthodox, such as Greek or Russian Orthodox? Are you Jewish, Muslim, Buddhist, Hindu? Are you atheist, agnostic, something else, or nothing in particular? Plenty of selections there. And still we see a sharp uptick in atheism and agnosticism and a sharp fall in Christianity, or those who claim to be Christians. The changes underway in the American religious landscape are broad-based. The Christian share of the population is down, and religious nuns, N-O-N-E-S, have grown across multiple demographic groups: white people, black people, and Hispanics, men and women in all regions of the country. and among college graduates and those with lower levels of educational attainment. Religious nuns are growing faster among Democrats than Republicans. Though the ranks are growing in both coalitions, there are more that identify on the left side of the spectrum, which we talked about in the last stream. And although the religiously unaffiliated are on the rise among younger people and most groups of older adults, their growth is most pronounced among young folks. The same group of people who are not having kids are growing. You see atheism and agnosticism growing the most in that group. Why is it important? Why is it important to be here doing this? That's why. Furthermore, the data shows a wide gap. Let me give you that chart back. The data shows a wide gap between older Americans, called baby boomers, and members of the silent generation, and millennials in their levels of religious affiliation and attendance. More than 80% members of the silent generation, those born between 1928 and 1945, describe themselves as Christians. That is 84%. 3/4 of baby boomers identify as Christians. In stark contrast, only half of millennials describe themselves as Christians. 4 in 10 say they are religious nuns, N-O-N-E-S. And 1 in 10 millennials identify with non-Christian faiths. So it's not like they're not doing anything. They're all over the map. But they're decidedly no longer Christian. Only about 1 in 3 millennials say they attend religious services at least once or twice a month. Roughly 2/3 of millennials, 64%, attend worship services a few times a year or less often, including about 4 out of 10 who say they seldom or never go. Now, indeed, there are as many millennials who say they never attend religious services as there are who say they go at least once a week. And that number is about 20%. Now, while these trends are clear, the U.S. is steadily becoming less Christian and less religiously observant as the share of adults who are not religious grows. Self-described Christians report that they attend religious services at about the same rate today as in 2009. Today, 62% of Christians say they attend religious services at least once or twice a month, which is identical to the share who said the same in 2009. So no growth. There's no growth there. In other words, the nation's overall rate of religious attendance is declining because Christians are attending church less often. But rather, there are now fewer Christians as a share of the population. The data suggests that Christians are declining not just as a share of the U.S. adult population, but also in numbers. In 2009, there were approximately 233 million adults in the United States. That's according to the Census Bureau. Pew Research Center's RDD surveys conducted at the time indicated that 77% of them were Christian, which means that by this measure, they were approximately 178 million Christian adults in the United States in 2009. Taking the margin of error of these surveys into account, the number of adult Christians in the United States as of 2009 could have been as low as 176 million or as high as 181 million. Now, today there are roughly 23 million more adults in the United States than there were in 2009. That's 256 million as of July 2019. About 2/3 of them, 65%, identify as Christian, according to the 2018-19 Pew Research report. or estimates. This means that there are now roughly 167 million Christian adults in the U.S., with a lower bound of 164 and upper of 169 given the survey's margin of error. Meanwhile, the number of religiously unaffiliated adults in the U.S. grew by almost 30 million over the same period. Most certainly, there's a generation gap in religious observance. What else do we see? A sharp fall in producing more Americans. Now, there's a gender gap as well in American religion. Women are less likely than men to describe themselves as religious nuns. That's the rate of about 23 versus 30%. And women are more likely than men to say they attend religious services at least once or twice a month. About 50%. But women, like men, so across the board, women and men together have grown noticeably less religious over the last decade. Now, this share of nuns among women has risen by 10 percentage points since 2009, similar to the increase among men. So, once again, a rise in non-religious and a fall in specifically Christian. The share of women who identify as Christian has fallen by 11 percentage points from 80% to 69% over that same period. Wrong direction, my friends. Christians have declined and nuns have grown as a share of the adult population in all 4 major U.S. regions. Catholic losses have been most pronounced in the Northeast, where 36% identified as Catholic in 2009, compared to today, where it's 27%. So all of these moves, folks, all of these moves are around 10%. All of these, where we see Christianity or a religious affiliation, all of those have dropped 10% or more over the past decade. Among Protestants, declines were larger in the South, where Protestants now account for 53% of the adult population, down from 64% in 2009. At least 10% in all cases. Now, let me say this. If you thought that the apologetics empire on YouTube was not a big deal, if you thought it was just for fun, if you thought it was just some guys out to have a good time, if you didn't think something like this movement is greatly needed right now in our time, now you know the truth. Now you know why we're on here doing what we're doing. Now you know why that we're attempting to vastly increase the presence of Christian YouTubers online and specifically on YouTube. Why? Because atheists and nuns far outnumber followers of Jesus Christ, biblical Christians in the purest sense, on this platform. And you can now see that it's not a matter of pride. It's not a matter of just wanting to be the big monkey on the block. Now, we intend first, always, to win souls for Jesus Christ, to share the gospel. That's number one. But also, we're working to preserve our free Republican democracy and fighting to encourage families to grow, to form, and to build, and to stay together, and to create more Americans, more Christian babies, for sure, but more babies in general. And we do this not only to preserve ourselves. This is a very important point. Being a Christian, an outspoken Christian on the internet, on YouTube, with websites and all that, It's not just about preserving what I think is good and right. It's not just about preserving Christianity. But we want all of you to have the benefits of a free society. A free society with liberties where you can choose to worship or not worship however you like and follow your dreams in any way you wish that does not interfere with the basic freedoms of others. That's what we're fighting for. And you know how that happens? You need Christianity in your country, and you need it to be strong. Christians will fight for your freedom. Christians will fight for your liberty. And as we've seen here in this presentation, clearly, Christianity is the faith of freedom, and importantly, it is also the faith of preserving freedom. So, I want to say this to everyone. Build families. Build families. And by all means, be fruitful and multiply, my friends. And God bless you all. We'll see you next time right here.